Welcome to the Mick, a Mook, and a Mike, hosted by four-time Emmy-nominated producer Frank Bates and retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor.
Today's guests, multi-Emmy award-winning production designer. Sets include Friends and Big Bang Theory. John Shaffner.
Happy New Year, my brother.
Oh, Frankie, my boy, Happy New Year to you, pal. Another year. We made it, huh?
We made it. We should make another 25 more.
Well, I really love your optimism. And I certainly hope it comes to pass. It hurts at all. Huh?
Derek's laughing.
I didn't laugh. You guys started to laugh.
Well, it sounds like the New Year's cheer has worked its way into this room.
I love your optimism. You know what? To me, everything has changed as we get older. You know, even foreplay is amazing. No, I can't do that. My neck, my elbow. Don't do it. Watch my knee. Oh man, it's just a whole different ball game. But hey, we persevered.
Yeah.
Go on.
We have a great guest today, John Shaffner, production designer for a lot of shows like Friends, Big Bang Theory, Roseanne.
Oh yeah. I'm dying to talk to him because, first of all, I'm not really sure what an art director does or a producer. But Roseanne, I mean, I always liked Roseanne Barr because stand-up, you know. Her stand-up was really funny. I remember one line that always cracks me up. She said, one time, she said, they don't want me on TV, right? They said that because I'm not feminine enough. They said they want me on TV. Well, they can suck my dick. Which is a great stand-up line. I mean, it's quick, it's to the point.
Yep, it gets everything.
It's terrific.
Well, another guy that's quick and to the point is Joe West.
Oh, way out west.
So there he is, Joe. Welcome.
Joe's blessing.
Happy New Year.
Happy fucking New Year.
Way to get it off on a good foot, you know. They say that you know if you're an alcoholic, if you have more than 3 nights a year where you're drunk, by the 4th of January, we'll fit in that category, you know. So we'll have to check into the Betty Ford Center again. So.
Shit, in my neighborhood, if you were drunk for 3 nights, we make you a designated driver.
Yeah.
That was light stuff. I spilt more of that.
Years ago, when I first started in the major leagues, I was working with this umpire named Nick Colosi. And Nick Colosi, during the summer, was an umpire, and during the winter months, he was a maitre d' at the Copacabana. And the way he got his job in the National League as an umpire was he used to give Chub Feeney one of the forward chairs or forward tables when he'd come into the Copa. And so Chub really liked Nick because he'd slip him a $5 bill. Nick would move him to the front. Well, Nick, $5 bill wasn't a whole lot for Nick because he was moving a lot of people a lot closer to the stage than Chub Feeney, but he was the league president of the National League. So the year that I worked with Nick, Barry Manilow came out with this song called At the Copacabana. And we're riding to the ballpark in Cincinnati. And of course, in this song, somebody gets shot in the Copa. And as soon as it came up over the radio, Nick said, that's not right. That never happened. And Frank Pulley and I looked at him like he had 2 heads. He says, no one ever got shot in the Copa. They got shot when they were leaving, but no one ever got shot.
Pretty funny story.
That was Billy Martin and Mantle used to hang out there all the time.
Billy
right?
Martin, Mantle, Bauer, Hank Bauer. That's
Whitey Ford.
Yogi was there. That's where they all had that famous incident at the Copacabana, which got Billy Martin traded.
Yeah.
That was the story. About the
Quick
Copa.
with their hands.
Yep, quick with their. Hey, Joe, what are your New Year's resolutions?
Well, my first New Year's resolution is to take Rita to Hawaii.
Good.
Because she wants to go to Hawaii, and I want to take her to Ireland because she's begging me to take her to Ireland, and that's what I promised her for her honeymoon, which we haven't taken yet. So, but anyway, we've been going pretty good, and it was really nice to see you out at Pebble Beach for the couple nights that you were there, and we had a great time seeing you there, and it was wonderful. But the New Year is always special when you get over that first day. You ever notice how it takes you a little while to get over that first day?
We have a lot of first days. These days, we have a lot of first days.
Take me a couple of weeks to learn how to write 2023.
Hey, you got any hints for?
Oh, I am definitely going to tell Joe about Ireland. Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell him?
But before you
Quickly.
go to Ireland, make sure you I'll send you an email or something to give you the whole list of places you got to see. I mean, I've spent I've been there about 15 times. All my relatives are still over on the other side, being born there. But I got you. I'll give you a good list, a good itinerary for you.
And Derek, what are your New Year's resolution?
Oh, that's a good question, Frank. Don't really have any New Year's resolutions. It's not my thing.
Hey, Mr. Excitement, Derek.
Can I write that one down?
Mr. Excitement.
What kind of medication is he on?
You got to stop breaking them in half, Derek. In half. Break them in half.
Yeah. He sounds like what's his name on Bill Maher, 65 oxycodone.
Matthew Perry.
Matthew Perry.
That guy's sharp. He's a sharp fella.
Well, I tell you, I'm going to one of my resolutions to continue to stay sober. We were talking about drinking before. I tell you, one night I crossed the room to get another scotch at the bar, and I ended up winning the dance contest. I used to punish it pretty good, Frankie.
When I was up in Pebble Beach, I had more drinks with Joe than I have probably had in the entire year.
2?
5.
5?
4 or 5.
Wait, what do you mean?
They must have run out of Stokes basket
in 2 days.
Oh, okay.
Oh, in 2 days.
3 the first day, 2 the second.
Yeah.
Man.
Yes, he did.
I used to spill more than that, Frank.
Oh,
Oh,
How many did Joe have?
Joe.
How many?
One of those negotiations I had with Major League Baseball was over a part in the contract where if baseball threw up a trial balloon, and what I mean by a trial balloon is whenever they want to throw something at you to see how you react, they make this what they call a trial balloon. And Manfred said, if you get picked up for drunk driving or stopped for drunk driving or public intoxication, it's a 60-day suspension. Before anybody could bat an eye, I said, we'll take that. My attorney fell out of his chair. And then we took a break and he said, why would you accept that? I said, because if you're so stupid that you don't have a plan to come home when you're going out drinking, you deserve a 60-day suspension. Said, furthermore, if any of us are picked up for drunk driving or public intoxication, it reflects on every umpire on the staff. So after I agreed to that, for the next 6 years, maybe it was 8 years, we didn't have a single umpire that fell prey to that. So it works. It works. If they know it's going to cost them money, they won't do it.
Schmuck.
And before that, we'd have 1 or 2 a year, and they'd make the little paper, a highlight in the paper somewhere, but they go out to work the next day and everybody on the staff, somebody's yelling from the grand, says, oh, y'all are just a bunch of drunks, which is not true. And it wasn't fair for any one of our guys to put everybody else in harm's way because they were too stupid to have a way home. So we agreed to that. I don't think they've taken it out of the contract yet either. So we've been pretty good boys.
Pretty good boys. Well, that's my resolutions on Billy, me, and you and Derek. We're all going to be pretty good boys in 2023.
Well, that'll be a change in scenery.
We need a few new faces around here.
Well, we got to get on to John Shaffner, our production design main interview. But thank you, Joe, for your New Year's resolutions, your time, and another great segment.
Sorry, I missed you up in Pebble, brother. But I'm
you were supposed to go.
I'm going to send you a really good itinerary.
You were supposed to. He's supposed to go to Pebble.
Yeah, there used to be a guy called No Show Jones.
No Show Jones. George Jones.
We had a guy, Henry Cho. You know Henry Cho, right?
Yeah.
They called him No Show Cho. Same thing. But John Shaffner will show, we hope. See you, Joe, next week.
All right, Joe.
All
Take care of yourself, pal.
care.
Good seeing you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you guys.
Frank, you want to get John on?
You want me to introduce? Don't go away, Joe, because we got to do the opening for the next show.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just on you. You can just say, "Can you get me John? Can you get John?" You don't have to.
Oh well, let's hang on.
I'm delirious anyway.
All right, so Derek, can you get our guest? Jesus Christ!
Our guest is Jesus Christ. This is going to be big, Frank. This is going to be a big one.
See, all that shit should be in, but
He's got some real connections, doesn't he?
You can put
I'm
it.
telling you.
You can put it in if you want. I don't care. Oh shit! All right.
I know what I'm going to ask him.
All right.
okay. What are you gonna ask, Jesus Christ?
Oh.
Jesus Christ!
Oh. You can leave all this in if you want.
Joe's right. He's got some great connections.
I
You
don't
know
care.
you fucking knew Jesus, did you?
Can you get John Shaffner on the line, please? The Emmy Award. Guy was nominated for more Emmys than I know what to talk about.
Yeah, but did he ever raise himself from the dead?
I don't. Let's get John Shaffner on the phone, on the line.
Bye, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Hey, John, how are you?
Wow, how are you? It's so good to see you.
From snowy Montana?
Snowy Missoula, Montana. Yes, 20 degrees today.
Oh, wow. That's my pal Billy O'Connor.
How are you, John? A pleasure to know you,
And
pal.
that's-
Pleasure.
Derek at the controls.
Likewise, for sure.
And Derek Herrick is at the controls.
Hello, hello.
Missouli.
Thank you, Derek.
I saw some.
I hope you have a lot of control.
I definitely do not. The person who has control, I'm going to put him on camera right now.
He's so full of shit.
Missouli, Montana. The name of
Missoula.
Missoula.
Yep.
Population,
Missoula.
what?
About 75,000. Metropolitan area, about 150.
How was it when you grew up there? How many people were there when you grew up there?
25,000.
Wow.
Area population of 75.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
So what do you do when you grow up in Montana? Skiing, hunting,
Oh.
fishing?
Skiing all the time. My folks were big skiers. My dad was the treasurer of the Rocky Mountain Ski Association, and I don't think we skied every weekend the minute the snow fell.
Wow.
Are you real good at it? You must be a great skier.
I gave it up when I got to the point where I got very anxious about shoulders, knees, hips, etc.
Yeah.
That's how I am with walking.
Well, how did you get
Yeah.
from Missoula, Montana to be nominated for, I don't know, one place I read 33 Emmys, one place I read 60 Emmys. I know you
No,
won
42. Nominated for 42.
Wow. I had 33 down, so 42.
42 Emmys, and you won 4, 5, 6?
6.
6.
Wow.
How many did you win after you became president of the Television Academy?
0.
So no nepotism
I was
involved.
accused that I was gonna, but no such luck.
Wow. Wow.
How does a person, my big question is, how does a person become you? I mean, do you aspire from the jump to be an art director? I mean,
Production
You know,
designer.
some people are just, I don't know, fortunate to sort of glom onto something in their early life about what they'd like to do. And I started creating imaginary spaces when I was in grade school, and oh boy, I get to do the set for the 7th and 8th grade prom. And then that continued into high school, where I immediately became engaged with the drama club, Thespian Troupe 3, and became president of that, and acted and designed sets and did lighting. And so I graduated from high school, and of course, your parents look at you in askance when maybe you'd like to go into show business because you know you're going to starve to death. And but my folks were like, well, okay, because my father had a business, a bookbindery, and he assumed that, well, once I gave up show business, I could come back and run the bookbindery.
And work
But it worked out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But it worked out that I didn't have to come back and work in the bookbindery.
So that got you to Carnegie Mellon. Your aspirations to be in show business.
Yeah, I actually went away to college for a year in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we ran out of money. So I finished my bachelor's degree at the University of Montana with some incredibly wonderful professors. And when I graduated, they said, "What are you going to do now?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And they said, "Go to graduate school." So actually, during that spring of my senior year, they convinced me to apply to Carnegie Mellon, and lo and behold, I got in and went east to school, as we used to say in Montana, and just had a fabulous 2 years there. Met Joe Stewart, and moved to New York, and actually I did a stint at the Seattle Rep, and before New York, and then my big break in New York, as they say in show business, is that you get sort of discovered, and I was fortunate enough to be working in the prop department at the New York Shakespeare Festival, and Wilfred Leach, the director, somehow found me and asked me and hired me to design 2 shows for Joe Pack in Central Park when I was 25. So I designed The Taming of the Shrew with Meryl Streep and Raul Julia with Wilfred, and I remember the time on the subway, we were going uptown to the park with Wilfred and Meryl Streep, and she turned to us and said, "You know, I think I might end up being a movie star."
Wow.
She had just finished doing The Deer Hunter.
Wow.
So, but we started getting interested in that recorded entertainment, and so we did a little bit of single camera work in as assistants in New York, along with doing some regional and off Broadway and a little off Broadway, and said, "You know what? Before it's too late, let's see what the coast has to offer," as they say in New York. So we bought a 1965 Thunderbird convertible, the same color as Thelma and Louise, but sometime earlier, and drove it to Hollywood, and immediately started looking for work. And I think this is the juncture that, when I'm speaking to students who are thinking about careers in show business, I suggest pondering what they'd like to work in single or multi-camera, because it was quite by coincidence that our career totally veered into multi-camera. But there's a sort of a reason that sort of you take your opportunities where they come. When we were living in New York, I was hired via a classmate and recommendation to go to Colonial Williamsburg and be the art director on a Perry Como Christmas special. And through that, I met an incredible producer, Bob Banner, and through him, Sam Riddle. Bob was one of the great pioneers of television as a producer, but in the 50s, he was the producer of the Gary Moore Show, and he and Gary went and saw Carol Burnett on Once Upon a Mattress and put her on the Gary Moore Show. And then when the migration of entertainment from New York to Hollywood occurred, he came west to produce the Dinah Shore Show, and went on from there to produce hundreds of one-off variety music specials. But because of that one serendipitous introduction, all of a sudden I was doing, country music special in back in Williamsburg at Busch Gardens, or the 25th anniversary of the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas with Tony Orlando and Dawn. That was in 1980. But I needed a regular job too, so I went to work with a superior, incredible production designer with a great history, Ed Stevenson, and I became sort of a decorator for him. So I got my foot in the sitcom business with him, decorating Soap and Benson, and the last thing I decorated was a pilot to the Golden Girls. So, but that, I was still doing things with Bob and Sam Riddle, and they started developing a talent show, and it was going to be called Talent Challenge, and I kept trying to twist my tongue around that. And those days, the art director also had to design all the titles. So I kept coming back, and I finally, one night over drinks with Sam, I said, this won't work. I think we have to come up with a new name. What about Star Search? So Star Search stuck, and then there was a great trying to figure out how we would score. Should it be like the Olympics, 1 to 10? And I said, no, let's score the show like, grades, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what we ended up doing on Star Search. So that gave me a good run. And then through a wonderful friend, lighting designer, I was introduced to David Copperfield. And I told David, well, I'd be happy to do this, but my partner Joe will have to be there a lot because I'm still pretty busy on Star Search. So that led to like 10 or 11 David Copperfield specials. But in one of those, again, as circumstances happen, we met Kevin Bright, who was part of the Bright Kaufman Crane team, and we did Family Album and then the pilot to Friends. And I couldn't get arrested in sitcom design. All of a sudden, I finished off my career starting sitcom at the age of 42, and I designed 156 pilots. 63 of those went to series for a total of 3,010 episodes, and I had to hire someone to figure it out because I was completely bewildered and lost track of everything.
So let me ask you a question. Why were Monica's walls purple?
Well, that's a good question. We were sitting in the meeting, and Kevin said, "I just don't want an off-white apartment set. And what colors do you think?" And I said purple. It just came to me because the women had very different coloring, and purple is the perfect color to go with skin tones. You know, that's complementary on the color chart. So they said, "Well, that sounds pretty weird. Go ahead, do it. We'll come down to stage and see it once it's painted." So sure enough, we had it set painted purple. There were a couple of variations in the purple and a few other colors going on. And Kevin, Marta, and David came down to the set, and they all looked at each other and said, "We love it. Keep it." So that's how it happened. You know, that was back in the day when you had a little less network and studio interference, and producers were allowed to, you know,
To do some
run
stuff?
their shows.
Well,
They
that's
stayed out of it. It was their job.
yeah, that's the great thing about when we were coming up. You got to work on so many shows like Friends, Big Bang Theory, Mom, Connors, Bob Hart's Abishola, Roseanne, George Lopez Show. There were so many situation comedies. You had to beat them off with a stick because even I was doing two at a time. It was an incredible period of time. Now there's only a handful. You know, there's the Chuck Lorre shows which you were doing, and there's not much beyond that. It's really a poor time to be in the sitcom business, wouldn't you say?
I would say, I mean, there's a few things in streaming. Certainly, whatever they call Disney Channel and some of these others, Nickelodeon, are keeping their foot in the door a little bit. But I believe that studios and the networks are really missing the boat here because financially, a hit sitcom can pay for everything else for years to come.
Yep. How many? How many pilots did you do?
156.
Yeah. Well, I bet you that the Friends and syndication could have paid for all the other 155 pilots that you did. That's how much money.
And a lot of money left over.
Yeah.
Same thing with
Big
Two
Bang,
and a Half Men.
Big Bang Theory, Roseanne. All of those were huge hits.
Made so much money for the network and the studio in particular. I mean, Warner Brothers, I think in the sitcom land, probably might have made as much, if not more, than in any other product, perhaps, other than, say, Hogwarts stories, you know, cash flow. I mean, minimum amount of outlay ultimately, even though we were astonished when they started paying actors $1 million a week, it's still, in the long run, those shows just make money. So it's short-sighted of the studios, short-sighted of the networks, and really tragically, I believe our country needs comedy. And the networks have just walked away from comedy. And I don't understand. Maybe there's not any good comedy writers anymore.
Well, as a layman, I got to ask you both. I mean, is it because business-wise they just figure it's cheaper to do reality shows? They don't have to pay a guy a certain amount of money, or is it a long shot gamble that they're going to have a big hit in comedy, or is that it, or the diversity of all the different networks and streaming and everything else cutting down the audience? What is it that makes them reluctant to go for the big shot, the long shot?
Well, I have several theories. Short-term theory is I think they lock the 1 hour format a lot. They lock single camera, no audience. It's more expensive to do it that way. But if they get a 1 hour format, they've got one show that people will tune into for an hour and they can sell all the commercials. If you do half-hour slots, each half hour has to be re-examined for commercial sales in broadcast TV. But, you bring up an interesting point. Reality TV did move into broadcast networks because it was cheaper. It's one of a kind moment. It's not going to repeat itself. So there's certain allure to the audience to pay attention this week because they're not going to go into reruns. But I always like to point out that television, as we call it, and broadcast in particular, really started out as a reality show tool.
Yep.
It was sports and reality. In 1947, one of the stations in LA, I think there were two at the time, they only had one show a day. And that was a show called Queen for a Day. And that was a reality show.
Starring Jack
And the
Bailey.
other thing that the network survived on in the days of the 40s and early 50s was boxing and wrestling, because those were controlled environments that they could shoot. So all of TV is dependent on the fact that it was a reality and sports programming. And then the next thing that came along was vaudeville. Now, we still have sports, and we still have reality.
And we have vaudeville, the political system. The election cycle is vaudeville.
Yeah. Yeah, the variety shows heyday in the 60s and early 70s has slowly faded away. Country music was the last to try to hold on to it. We did a series for Dick Clark called Hot Country Nights that managed to survive a season of variety with comedians and singers, in country. But that was really pretty much the last variety show, unless you want to call late night talk shows variety, which they sort of squeeze in that category, I guess. But
so, John,
I miss vaudeville.
Let me ask you, how do you make sets your own? How could you describe a typical John Shaffner set? How do you describe Friends, for example, or Big Bang Theory, or The Connors? What goes into it that makes them different?
What ultimately makes them different isn't me. It's the fact that I am very much a student of the word, of the story, of the characters. So each set has to be about those people, their environment, their world. And so the Friends of sets there in New York was specific to supporting that kind of safe and secure coziness of that group of people. So it wasn't about the fear of living in New York. It was about the joy of friendship in New York. So we focused on that. I think one of the things that I have tried to do in scenery is make it real, but yet make it have a slight, it all has to start with the story. It starts with the words and the characters and who they are. And I don't believe in over-decorating necessarily, which I've seen a lot of in others' work sometimes, wherein they might cover a wall with 5 different kinds of wallpaper and brick and wood, and just because they're afraid to let a wall with a light switch and a lamp be its own thing. So I think I've tried to make them real, but yet still unique and special to the story.
So is it fair to say, like when a writer writes a piece, the scenery, the placement of the place itself has to be, almost one of the characters. It has to be, but not intruding on the story itself.
Absolutely. I mean, and of course it's a collaboration with the producer doing George Lopez with Frank and with Bruce Helford. Really, in many ways, Bruce would set a tone and have ideas that he wanted. Frank was definitely, I love working with Frank because he had, a good opinion about things, and that I could bring things to the table and we could have a discussion about it. What's going to work best, for the story? What is the socioeconomic level of our character? How important is the wife's choosing the colors as opposed to, say, George being the color picker outer? So then we could shift some of it into being a little prettier. When we started out the show, I went over to George's house and spent an hour with him and his wife, and they showed me all their favorite colors and everything that they'd done, and I would hear George say, well, she picked that out. I wouldn't have picked that out. So that was those kinds of shows are unique. It was similar with Drew Carey. He actually brought in pictures of his childhood home, and he really insisted that the environment reflect the kind of working class environment that he came from, and not a big house, older kitchen, not too much. And we were very fortunate with that. Roseanne, the Connors. I think ABC really had a nice attitude about working class comedy in some ways. A short story about the Big Bang Theory. When we did the pilot, our two characters, Sheldon and Leonard, were starving graduate students who lived in a boarding house full of dragged in from the street furniture, and they were very messy, and it looked real, ugly. And Nina called Chuck and said, I can't pick up the show. And she said that was the worst phone call she ever had to make. But then she said the best call was the next one I made when I called him and said to do it again. But this time, I don't want to see, abject, poor, desperate kids. So I went to Chuck's office and he said, John, the set was all wrong, but it's not your fault. We got to make it look like it fits into the CBS lineup. So we moved our characters and they became professors who didn't care about money per se, but we moved them into a nice upscale-ish, fixed up, but not too much, place in Pasadena. So that's what CBS wanted, as opposed to ABC has really let even the Connors look like a real working class story.
Well, I thought that was a great moment in the Big Bang Theory because the elevator never worked. For I don't know how many episodes you ever did, but the elevator never worked. And on the last, the last episode, the elevator door opened, and I thought that was a classic moment.
The story was Chuck, and it was very clear, Chuck and Bill wanted the staircase to be transitional walking opportunities for the characters to talk. So they weren't standing still somewhere in a hallway or in an elevator. And he did say he wanted Kaylee's apartment, Penny's, across the hall. But I wanted to give enough space so the hallway had room for scenes. And to get the stairs to work around. So I was laying it out, and I said, oh dear, I have this big blank wall in the middle here. I don't want to hang a picture and put a console table and a lamp there. That'll look stupid. I know, I'll put an elevator in there. So I took the model into Chuck and Bill, and I said, okay, here's the model, here's the apartments, all that. And Chuck put, why did you do that? Why is there an elevator? I told you I didn't want an elevator. And I said, Chuck, it's always broken. That's the story. That's why they're walking up and down the stairs. And he looked at me like I was crazy, and then he went, oh, okay. And that's the story of the elevator.
That's
Wow.
a great
That's
story.
That's great, huh?
That's
And
great.
they end up using it to kicker for the series. That
Yeah.
the elevator worked at the very
At
end.
the very end, the door.
Yes.
They left the apartment. Then the elevator doors.
That's
opened
fabulous
up.
kicker. A fabulous
up.
kicker.
They still had to walk down the stairs. They only sent their luggage down the elevator.
That's hilarious.
You know,
So Chuck had his way.
George Lopez was on the show a couple of months back, and he told the story of the Lopez kitchen. And I think that I'll keep the woman's name out of this because I wrote it in the book. But when we were looking at the pilot, she came to the kitchen and she said the kitchen doesn't look Mexican enough. I don't know if you were there. I think.
Oh, yes.
She goes, the kitchen doesn't look Mexican enough. And George says, when you put the fucking Mexicans in the kitchen, then tell me it doesn't look Mexican enough.
That's the kind of response you hope someone with the guts can say it.
Yep.
You know, the other challenge with that kitchen ultimately for me was Bruce really wanted a really big sliding glass door that all pocketed into the wall. So 3 big pieces of glass would move away. So when they were in the kitchen, sometimes you'd shoot them towards the cabinets and the island, and they were in the kitchen. And then the person who's standing at the island with the patio and the backyard in the background, you'd shoot them, and you'd think, what are they doing in the backyard? But I don't know. We sort of didn't dwell on that too much. I worried about it some, but no one else seemed to. So I said, well, there you go.
Yep. It worked out. It worked out. How'd you come up with the slanted roof in Monica's living room?
Well, that's the story. We were at a meeting with Jimmy Burrows, the director at Paramount, where he was directing Frasier. And I had presented, Joe and I were there, and we presented at lunch a model that showed your classic pair of New York windows, kind of like what were in the boys' apartment. And Jimmy said, oh, can you do anything with those windows to make them unique? Like, why can't you do a skylight? And of course, we nodded and smiled and said, oh, sure, a skylight. And then, you know, I'm thinking, well, doesn't he understand that a skylight is in the ceiling? So I started researching pictures of a lot of New York apartment buildings, top floors. And it was not uncommon. It wasn't real common, but it was, you know, there were examples of that kind of artist window on a top floor where the window would be angled like that. And in fact, the next summer I went to New York and took a lot of pictures of buildings that had those windows on the top floor. Of course, everybody said, well, how could they afford such an expensive, cheap apartment that was so big? And the answer in our mind from the very beginning was it's a walk-up. Because when we lived in New York, we got a $250 a month apartment because it was a 6-floor walk-up. It went up $100 a floor. So if you've been on the second floor, it would have been $850 or something, you know? So that was critical. But the first episode, there's a little bit of that barefoot in the park. I don't know how many people remember the play, but it was a top floor walk-up with a skylight. And they would always go through the door going, ooh, ooh, ooh. And of course, they tried that out a little bit. And of course, that becomes a very old joke by, you know, episode 2. 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2. So we shifted them down to the 4th floor, even with the slanted window, and never talked about it again, you know. But so then they had to write in the story that it was a rent-controlled apartment, that it belonged to her grandmother, you know, Monica's grandmother, et cetera, et cetera. But it started out being a walk-up apartment, and that's why they got a nice apartment for cheap.
Hey, just going back to Lopez, don't I recall you won one of your Emmys for Lopez show?
Yes, I did. And guess what? The best thing in my life ever happened. George was the presenter that night, and he's the one who gave me the Emmy.
That's terrific.
That's terrific.
That was the Jetsons episode we had.
Yes, it was.
George.
When I got that script, I said, They're kidding, right? Frank, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this?
Is there anything that sticks out in your mind? I mean, of all the shows you've done, was the most challenging set you ever designed? That just was like complete nightmare? Or?
Well, I will say this. Fortunately, the incredible support of the services and the artisans at all of the studios always made me feel like we can do this. And there were a couple that kind of threw me on 2.5 Men. They decided they were driving down Pacific Coast Highway and there was a flood and Alan got washed away. And so we built a mountain that was 200 feet long, 45 feet tall, out of materials and covered with dirt and blankets and all the stuff we do. And then we had to rig a giant drum at the top that would dump an enormous amount of water down so that as he was coming down, his car would get washed away, which was pulled away by special effects. It was enormous. And one other thing, there was a short segment on The Big Bang Theory where he was having a nightmare. Leonard he was on a expedition in a boat in the Antarctic, and he was on the deck, and the deck was tossing back and forth, and the giant octopus was coming over to grab him. And so we had to build a platform that was 10 feet off the ground that was held up by just a few points with a joint in here so that it could work its way all around and tip kind of almost like a crazy ride at an amusement park. And then we have to combine that with fire hoses and rain. So yeah, that was kind of crazy,
When it's intricate like that, and you got to go through a lot of, obviously spend a lot of money to set up a set like that. How do you get that cleared? Is that through the producer? Is it the producer that clears that and says, okay, we give you the X amount of dollars to do this? Or
yes, and it depends a lot on the executive producer's relationship with the studio and the line producers. Frank and Bruce Helford had a lot of authority with the system, saying this is what the script is, this is what we want to do, and basically they would, pretty much say, well, okay. And of course, part of the process is, the stealing from Peter to pay Paul in production. Budgets are set for a particular episode, and they're supposed to be the same for every episode. So some episodes you don't have a new set, and some episodes you have complicated sets. I remember one on George Lopez where we had to create a wedding in a beautiful park, and then there was a terrible cyclone or hurricane that blew through it, and we had to have it totally destroyed. And they wanted to shoot both sections of it on the same day, as I recall. So we never really saw the destructed one until we were ready to do it. Same thing once on a terrible show called Joey, the spinoff with Matt LeBlanc, where one day in one episode we see his new place that he's bought on the Hollywood Hills with the big view, and he finally hit it and had money, and it burned down in the same episode. So overnight the crew had to come in and totally replace, burn, fix, change everything to make it look like a steaming rubble of a burnt down house, which of course we couldn't see until it was actually done the next day when they were shooting it, But
yeah, people don't realize how hard you guys work and the hours you guys work, because very often on a show that shoots Thursday and Friday, and there's got to be a changeover between sets, we'll shoot till 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. And when we come back at 7 o'clock the next morning, there's got to be a major changeover in the sets. And you guys work from like 7 p.m. till almost 6:58 just to get the set ready for us to be in at 7 o'clock and begin shooting.
Again, I give tremendous respect to the artisans involved. I give myself credit for imagining what it should ultimately look like and communicating it so that when they show up to do their work, they have the required sketches, documentation, drawings, even oftentimes a model, so that they were clearly guided. They didn't have to stand there scratching their head, wondering what to do. And then more often than not, I would come in, very early enough so that I could put finishing touches on it with them, or I would stay late and help them get started on it, and then before I would walk away. Because I can't just sit there and watch all night. I don't feel good the next day. And I feel that a lot of times the crew works better when they know they're by themselves and they're not being, looked over their shoulder all the time and being second guessed.
And you've got a construction coordinator that you can trust.
Oh my God. I had some of the greatest construction coordinators and people in the world, truthfully. It was something different and new to me from the work that I'd been doing in the entertainment variety universe, where I was responsible, Joe and I were responsible for establishing budgets, bidding scenery out to scenery construction shops, organizing the delivery of the sets, and then working with the staging supervisor who would install, but never show up with an extra screw or a hammer. Mostly, the scenery had to be show up and clipped together, quickly. On the American Music Awards that we did for 23 years, I believe, those sets for each act had to come in all finished, completed, and roll out of the truck and clip together and roll out onto the stage. We had such short turnarounds on things like that.
So John, now I'm going to ask you something that Derek's going to shoot me for. But
oh boy.
Did you design the house you're living in Montana? Can you?
No. This house was designed in 1967 when I was a wee tot. But I saw it being built in high school because I lived a mile away. It was a family friend who had built this monster here. And then they had sold it to another family shortly after it was built. I wasn't sure.
Hang on a second, John.
I got a request.
Yeah, because I was going to say, can you send us some pictures of the house, interior and exterior, and just sort of talk us through each of those photos? Go ahead, Derek.
Well, what I was thinking, we'd love to get a tour of the house.
Well, hello from Montana. Happy to welcome you here to the forest land of Paddy Canyon in Missoula, Montana, where we have made the decision to retire to here at our home. As you can see, it's a kind of an unusual structure. It's very large. It was built in 1967. In fact, here's some more of the main house. As you can see straight through the upstairs living room as well as the downstairs studio room, we call it now. And you might notice this enormous driveway, which originally was entirely heated with hot water pipes with great boilers and pumps. And I will show you the inside. So welcome to the front door of the house. As you can see my reflection in the glass, and now we will go in. Now we've entered the main entrance to the house. This is the entrance hallway. To our right here is the formal dining room. Yes, that is the original chandelier that came with the house, along with the gold foil flocked wallpaper. To our left here, as we pass around, we can see into the stair hallway. These are the staircases that lead us to the lower level. Notice there's only one railing and no visible means of support for the treads. And here we have a very special room in the house, the cloak room. So when you arrive here for a party, we have a place for your coats. The living room features a small sitting nook with one of the 5 fireplaces. And as we walk towards the living room, you can see it is one of the arms of the house, which is a giant X or cross. So the living room is one room completely surrounded by glass. So you can see all of the exteriors, and then you see the big fireplace. Of course, retiring means finding a place for everything. So one of our challenges was find a place for the trophies, shall we say, our memories of Hollywood. So here we have a room dedicated to the trophies, a good bar, and a pull-down screen over the fireplace so we can watch movies. And what to do with books? Yes, we moved all the books. Boy, they are heavy. They certainly increase the, let's say, the cost of moving as we moved our entire library. And this is only part of it. There's more in other rooms. I hope you've enjoyed our tour of retirement in Missoula, Montana. Look forward to our visit.
And now we're back. We can see you.
Well, welcome to Pictures of Montana here.
How did you develop a strategy to approach your job and to be one of the best in the world at it?
I got into this work primarily and became successful at it because of the incredible positivity and enthusiasm and inspiration of amazing teachers. I had the good fortune in all of my college years of having really inspirational people lead, and at the same time giving you enough rope to fail or succeed on your own. And when you have that opportunity and that freedom to fail, I think sometimes you can discover what works best for you and what works best for the work that you're doing. And I think the challenge and the interesting thing about being a production designer in recorded entertainment, or for that matter, a stage designer in live theater, is collaboration and ability to have true renaissance, shall we say, experiences and an education that involves lots of things, being very aware of the physical world, studying art, architecture, history of design and ornament, where everything comes from, what causes things to be shaped, painted, colored, look the way they are. And over time, I like to say, people say, well, how did you do this? And I said, well, I practiced. Right. You don't start out on the top. When I was doing Friends, it was one series for the fall. And then the studio called me and said, well, would you be interested in taking over another show? And I was very anxious about that. And I thought, well, my old boss, Ed Stevenson, used to do 3 or 4 or 5 at a time. Why don't I try it? And I used to decorate 4 shows at a time. So I said, well, okay. So I took on Hope and Gloria. And okay, that worked out. And then I got a call about another one. So I hoisted that up onto my path and became more adept at organizing, of course, and as I say, practice. But it all goes back to the story, the collaboration, and having enough of the experiences of observing the physical world to, imagine the environment where the story would take place. And as opposed to being an architect, I also had the opportunity to realize that, well, if it didn't work out so good, it'll be gone by next week. Right. But, again, I only had a few real duds, and fortunately I had Chuck Lorre to point them out. A movie theater lobby that somehow I had selected a wallpaper that absolutely was terrifying to see. And Chuck came in and looked at me like, excuse me, what is blank that? And I went, you're right, we'll fix it by tomorrow. And we did. But it really,
Yeah,
it's
I want to add one thing to your answer. You were great at so many different things, but I think your true talent is that you were one of the nicest people I've ever worked with, and
oh,
that niceness has the ability to get you called in for another show and another show and another show. There are a lot of people who could have maybe not done Friends, but could have done a reasonable facsimile. And there were a lot of art directors that I work with, not Greg Richmond, who I worked with a lot, who I love, who were assholes. And you were never an asshole. You were always one of the nicest people that I've ever worked with. And I think that's truly how you got to the top of your business, because that's how you became the president of the Television Academy, who gives out the Emmys.
well, thank you. Those are the kind of compliments that make me humble. But I appreciate that, because I do think, we are all in this business together. We collaborated, and yes, it's a very stressful job for everybody on stage, hair and makeup, performers, Frank, you certainly, props. Everybody has their things they have to get through, and we all have varying degrees of ways we express frustration or anxiety or whatever. But I always try to keep in mind that we're all in this together. And even though someone may be blowing their stack now, it's because they care. And we all care. I mean, every once in a while you do run into this psychotic personality in entertainment.
Right.
But for the most part, and this is what drew me, I think, ultimately to the theater at such a young age, is that every project becomes its own family. And in that family, we all have different relationships. And sometimes we get along with everybody in the family, and sometimes we don't. But because we're there to get the job done, we set aside some of those feelings, and we pay attention to what needs to be done. And I genuinely like people. I don't have a place for me to not like. I have been accused of being way too Pollyanna, where if you look for the good in someone, surely you will find it. And that is always my operating ways to go, even at times when I'm like getting a little anxious about it, and like, I don't know about this person. We're going to work through this. And so most of the time it worked out.
I want to solidify this in the annals of electronic history. So you work with Frank Pace. And I just want to, so we've done 120 shows, and most of the shows we've done, people have had pretty direct communication or connection with Frank. And there have been so many guests that have expressed their love for Mr. Pace.
Maybe like.
Oh, okay, fine. Like, so I want to know, you seem like an extremely genuine guy. So, and keep in mind that Frank is retiring tomorrow, so you don't have to say anything super nice.
He's not. He's not.
What is it like working with him, and why is he so good at his job? And I have some thoughts regarding what you said earlier about being, or what Frank said about you being nice. But I want to know what it's like working with him, and why do you think he's such a people have such great things to say about working with him as a producer?
Oh my
Well,
God.
first of all, let me tell you,
Make this short.
at very first, I was scared to death of Frank. But I love Frank, and what made him so great at his job was his truthfulness and his honesty and his directness. There was we didn't have to say, well, what is Frank going to think? What is Frank going to think? He would tell you what he thought. And it would come from a place of genuine desire to make a better product. And that made me respect, which I think love is important, but sometimes I think equally respect is important, and especially in our work, because it's very difficult to work with someone who, might be manipulative or be two-faced. But Frank was never that way. What you see is what you get, and what you get is a guy who tells you what he thinks. And when you know where you stand and when you know what the challenge is, then you can face the challenge.
See, Derek, I told you I'm an acquired taste. Unfortunately, we've done 120 of these, and you still haven't acquired the taste.
You're still spitting out the product. So aside from professionalism and
forget that. Let's
family, the family orient, the family you become when you're working on a show. What was your most rewarding show to work on, and why? I mean,
oh gosh, well, I have to be honest with you. I always was torn between the business of entertainment, variety, music, and of course the storytelling aspects of comedy. Because I love comedy. I mean, some of the most fun things I ever did was sit and read some of Bruce Helford and his team's scripts from the Drew Carey Show, when inadvertently, without really planning it, they discovered in the pilot that they had the perfect antagonist to Drew as the protagonist with the character Emmy. And then I would get a script and I would sit in my office and just laugh. And that, I was like thankful when we had the writers' strike. What I missed most was reading the scripts and laughing. But at the same time, you asked me what I look back on as terribly rewarding. 12 years of Star Search and watching those kids grow into huge careers. Even our junior Star Searchers like Justin Timberlake and even, God bless her, Britney Spears and, Sharon Stone. I mean, the list goes on and on of the number of people that came out of that show. And so I have a tremendous soft spot in my heart for that. And Friends, just because it was so amazing. But we've done so much with others, I mean, once in a lifetime experience doing an Andy Williams Christmas show when there used to be Andy Williams and there used to be Christmas shows. Every one of them, there's so many special ones, but I had the good fortune to have enough different categories I can have a favorite experiences and loves for all in each of those areas of work.
John, let me ask you, in your years of hosting, not hosting the Emmys, but being the governor of the Emmys, are there any backstage stories that you can tell about any actor or anybody that we'd find maybe humorous?
Well, this is kind of medium humorous because fortunately we all got over it, but it took a little time. When Charlie Sheen went off the rails, I was working with Mike Darnell and Mark Burnett at Fox to produce the Emmy Awards. And as chairman and CEO, I had the opportunity to review just about all the material and have meetings just to kind of safeguard the Emmy brand, as well as working with the committee that had been assigned to work with that. And of course, because the Television Academy being different from the Picture Academy, we basically gave over the rights to the network to produce the show. And they essentially, unless we have a huge difference of opinion, they would be able to select the host of the show. And so anyway, during this process of that particular Emmys, which was my last one, I get a call from Chuck Lorre's office saying, Chuck needs to see you right away. And I went tearing over to Chuck's office going, I don't know what this is about. What scripts are we working on? Which show? And he came in, he said, you better close the door. And he was very upset that he had just learned that Charlie Sheen was going to be presenting Best Actor in a Comedy on the Emmys. Of course, from The Big Bang Theory was on it. And people may or may not recall there was great antagonism, shall we say, between Charlie Sheen and Chuck. And Chuck and I and Peter Roth and Bruce Rosenblum, we were all, the whole Warner Brothers team we were all on the same side. We called Fox, please don't do this. This is inappropriate. It's too early to revive Charlie's career. He needs more time. It was really, really ugly. Mike Darnell was convinced it was going to be one of the great moments of television to have Charlie Sheen doing this, whereas it made myself nauseous about the whole idea, and equally, I believe, for Chuck. And I convened a meeting of the executive committee of the Academy. We elected to tell Mike Darnell and Mark Burnett that they could not have Charlie Sheen as a presenter because we did have final say on all presenters. And the lawyer for the TV Academy pulled me aside shortly afterwards and said, you can't do this because it's going to be all about you and Chuck Lorre, and you work for him, and that's why you're doing this, and you can't do this. So I had to report back to Chuck finally that there was no way he was doing it. So I went and sat in the booth during the Emmy Award when we got to that segment of the program, and the director who I had known a long time, I said, look, no matter what you do not put the camera on Chuck Lorre when Charlie Sheen is on stage. Do you understand me? And he was respectful and did not do that until Jim Parsons came out on the stage and had the Emmy in his hands. Then they cut to Chuck. So it wasn't exactly funny, but it was a pretty serious and moment in that history. The other challenge with being chairman and CEO of the TV Academy when I was there was this really frightening aspect of the networks not being willing to pay the license fee that the Academy needed. And so Ken Zifrin, who was this incredible attorney in Los Angeles, headed up our team. And we met with all the network executives at a big meeting, and I tried to convince them that the Emmys were important to everybody and that it was important to make sure we had a healthy, positive organization and we were dependent on the income and et cetera. And then Ken burrowed down.
Let me just stop you, John, because I want to explain to Billy and Derek and our audience, the licensing fee is what the network pays. And that doesn't necessarily always cover the cost of the show. So you want your licensing fee to be as high as possible so you don't have to deficit spend on the show. So now continue.
Yeah, well, and in the Emmy situation, the network actually pays for the cost of the shows. It does not come out of the license fee. Whereas the fee for the Oscars, the cost of the show does come out of their license fee. But we managed to come through with a really fantastic deal, best deal ever, increased it by several $1 million. And that was one of the most, that day when that papers were signed, I was very, very relieved.
And let me ask you, you probably didn't get paid very much for being the chairman and the CEO of the Emmy. Yeah. So those two things showed what you got, why you advanced to such great success, because you were doing this out of love for the Academy.
Yes.
And they probably presented you two of the most stressful times in your career.
Absolutely. But it was the love of our community. I mean, I really believe that in the city the size of LA, there's something very bonding about those of us who work in television, so to speak. I mean, and we really are a subset of the entertainment business as a whole. People who work in single camera long form is really another universe. But the work of multi-camera plus episodic TV, we are a subgroup of people who are engaged and love our work, and we're a community, and we kind of have to look after each other.
Yep.
So I always felt that's what the TV Academy was about. The thing I was proudest of when I was chairman, I initiated in my first year a new award called the Television Academy Honors, whereas I like to say we recognize television with a conscience. So we've just completed the 15th anniversary of the Television Academy Honors, which is usually in the late spring. This year it was a little bit later. You know, the pandemic screwed up everybody's schedule. But we really go forward and recognize 6 or 7 programs that might not necessarily be in the running for, quote, an Emmy award, but deserve to be recognized for the responsibility they take in enlightening and educating and you know, bringing something really positive and thoughtful into the conversation in our culture.
That's true.
But I really should finish with a few comedic stories. You know, we just lost our friend Kirstie Alley.
Yeah.
Now we know she was a sometimes challenging personality to work with, but she was could be so much fun. And we started doing a series called Veronica's Closet, and she came down to the set for the first time. I'd met her once or twice showing models. And I was walking her through the sets, and she said, "I sure do like your sport jacket. Let me try it on." So with me in it, she grabbed the front of my coat and put her arm down there, and then put her arm down there and tried to wrap it around both of us.
Yes.
You know, and so those are some of my fun memories over the years of, you know, working with talent. So
I'll give
in honor of
I'll give Derek the last word.
Oh, thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. That's lovely. So I another question I have. So I'm looking at the Friends set right now, and just in the kitchen area, there may be 150 pieces just on the, you know, around the sink and in the cabinet section. And then I mean, I don't know how many, you probably know the answer to this, how many pieces are actually in this living room set. So the first question I have is there a sort of like a record, a map? Do you guys have each piece numbered? How do you keep track of this sort of thing?
Oh, it's, you know, once we did the first year on stage 5, and a lot of photography was how that was recorded. We moved to stage 24, had to make some adjustments on the set, reduce the size of the little outdoor, you know, tar beach, as we used to call it in New York. But we did have the photographs, so we worked entirely from photographs. But as the series neared its end, the Warner Brothers archival department came in and marked everything with invisible inks, and which you could, you know, then examine. They did a complete inventory of absolutely everything, and it really locked down the stuff. So when we had to recreate the show for the 25th anniversary that didn't happen until the 27th last summer, when it was moving to HBO Max, we had a lot of documentation, but still some things had disappeared, like the rug in the living room. So we hired a graphics designer who looked at a lot of pictures, and we were able now, however, to actually print the pattern on the rug and put underneath the furniture. A lot of the main pieces were there, but there were some smalls that seemed somehow to have disappeared. So that was kind of the story of, you know, keeping track of things. One thing that had occurred when we redid the rebuild of it, shall we say, they did keep most of the apartments and the hallway in between together, although it was in dreadful condition. It looked like they had tied a rope around it and dragged it to the storage unit in Valencia. But they had taken the coffee house and chopped it all up into pieces and put it in the museum at Warner Brothers. And so there was much discussion about, can we get it out of there, move it to the soundstage, and build it back to what it was? And I finally convinced everybody, no, we could read it and build from scratch, because there was really no way to take it out of the museum. So we built a whole new coffee house.
But
Um,
you probably had the original set plans, didn't you?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
oh yes, all hand drawn with a pencil
Wow.
from back in the day.
Yep.
And I have one more question about so you mentioned the rug, which was part of my question. So since you have so many pieces in this set, I wonder. So there's like patchwork on the pillows, but there's a blanket on the one of the chairs in the living room, and then the sofa and the chair are completely different styles. So how do you land like just the rug, for example? How do you land on that? There's a trillion different styles of rugs in the world. How do you land on that piece, and how does everybody sign off on that?
So set decorating is really a tremendous art form, a profession. We had the good fortune of having Greg Grande as the set decorator, but the challenge to Greg was I had worked with him a little bit, but Kevin and Marta and David we'd all worked together, and they said, well, we want Greg to do this. And I said, fine. But Greg had never been to New York. And Greg did not understand, being a Santa Monica fellow, what that meant for people with limited resources.
Right.
That when you live in New York, one of your main shopping districts is the street, especially on the Upper East Side the day before the trash collection. And you haunt Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, Upper Fifth Avenue, because people with money, with big money, would buy new furniture, and then the old furniture would get carried down and set on the street. So you would be amazed, especially 25, 30 years ago, what you could find.
Right.
And then New York has an enormous number of secondhand shops as well. So we really felt that the furnishings should be very eclectic, very found. And because we had done the big purple statement, I said to Greg, you're not going to be able to work with a lot of color in here. So I recommend going neutrals, like the sofa and the chair were, kind of dark oatmeal-y colored. The coffee table was a natural wood tone. The upstage area, he was able to bring in some yellow gold colors on the drapery patterns there.
Right.
The kitchen table, I said, let's do chairs that are different, they're different colors. Because the kitchen had a little more color in it. It had some yellow and a little turquoise. So we worked multicolors into that area. But it was really about working with Greg to say, it should match, but it has to somehow coordinate, and we have to give Monica the respect that her character would have a kind of a knack for doing this kind of eclectic selection, whether it's almost instinctual and subconscious. And I think we discovered in Greg that talent, which I'm not even sure he was fully aware of, about the ability to do that disparate things that are still talking to each other. I think of set decorating as the words in the paragraph. They have to make sentences. They have to tell a story. They have to talk to each other, be next to each other and make sense. But it doesn't have to be matchy. So that was the goal of the interior decor of that. And then the boys' apartment, I said, I want everything brown, because these two boys are afraid of color. They're such guys. They're dudes. But we didn't use the word dude 25 years ago, 28 years ago, that they wouldn't have any color. And then as the series progressed, they added more color as their characters grew in the story. I mean, 10 years is a long time for a show. And so one of the things that was on everybody's mind was that it would constantly have little changes. They'd go to a new radio, there was flowers. There's a couple chairs that changed out. The throw over the sofa, it wasn't the same one from year 1 to year 10. A lot of the things in the kitchen were, because people don't usually throw out their mixing bowls. But
John,
a lot of the things changed.
let me ask you, the show was on the air for 10 years, but what was the lifespan of the show within the show? What did it take place over 2 or 3 years, or did it
Good question.
take
Well, that
place
is a good
over 10
question.
years?
Because nobody wants to get old on TV per se, but these characters can't help but mature a little bit. And I think what helped tell the story of time passing was babies, because we know how long it takes to make a baby.
Right.
And so between Ross's wife and the baby, and then there was Rachel's baby towards the middle end of the show. Of course, on TV, babies come and arrive, and then they disappear, or a year later they're 5 years old. At least on a soap opera. But I think we never really thought about it. It was just another season, and we picked up where we left off.
Right.
So it was one continuous story. So if you watch the shows and you binge watch, any number of seasons, you'll just feeling like it's a continuum, but you won't necessarily be aware that it's 10 years.
I got a quick question about Friends, if I can. Matthew Perry has a book out right now, bestseller, matter of fact, New York Times bestseller, Friends, Lovers, and I think it's called The Thing You Don't Mention, or The Things You Don't Want to Talk About, or whatever.
Right.
But in it, he says he was doing 65 oxycodone a day, which is astronomical. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me. Was that ever noticeable on the set, or was he ever impaired? And I'm not talking dirt. He's
no. I have nothing but empathy for Matthew and what he went through, which started out as some back issues and pain, and probably psychological dependency issues that grew over time. He was very respectful of the work environment, and it was not always obvious to everyone what was going on until it became more serious and we could wait issues. And Kevin, Marta, and David were very concerned, but at some point, it's really challenging for producers to decide at what point are they going to intercede in a person's private life. If they show up, they do their work, they remember their lines. I would think the most obvious challenge for Matthew did become sometimes in line work. But the cast, I think, knew more than anybody else what was going on. But they were very tight. From the very beginning, those 6 people chose to become an inner circle of protection for each other. And so they went out of their way to ensure that Matthew had could fall back, and they would make sure he would succeed in the work when he was needed to be there. When we would go on hiatuses and things, even they would try to follow up on him. But his disease really took him a long way, and he really did get worse after the series. And I did a series with him that was The Odd Couple, and he was going through a very difficult time on that. We would shut down for 2 weeks. I think we did it 3 times during the program, and he became very erratic. So that was the time I think I saw him at his worst ultimately, and he looked dreadful. But I'm so proud that he was been able to face his demons and do what he's done, and I wish him the best.
Oh yeah, I mean, I saw him in an interview with Bill Maher, and not only extremely articulate guy, but very open about what he's gone through and the tragedy of what he did. And I just wanted to touch on it.
Well, John, you've been very open with everything we've asked you so far, and it's a terrific thrill to have you on our podcast. We'll wish you nothing but the best, and I hope to see you soon.
Well, I'm, it was a big transition, selling our home in Los Angeles that we've been in for 30 years and, a few blocks from a house we've been in for 8 years, 42 years in LA, to Montana has been quite a cutoff. But we're learning how to integrate now our life in LA with our life here, now that we've finally got everything mostly put away here. As you can see over the closet, everything has about found its place. And so now we're going to just start coming to LA, come to the desert, and hopefully travel. So it was time to leave Hollywood. And as that old story goes, what? And leave Hollywood? Well, yes, it reached that point.
Yeah. Well, congratulations with all your success, and give me a call when you're in LA for sure.
Yes, Frank. Thank you. It's so good to see you as well and looking as good as you do. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on, John. Much appreciated.
See you, pal.
Real pleasure to meet you.
Yes, I'll be sending off the video.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye.
So,
very interesting guy, and what an interesting career. And again, as a layman, you don't really think about that, what goes on,
yeah, and he really was the king of the production designers in show business, in episodic television, television comedies for 25 years. The first guy you would call would be John Shaffner.
Yeah, and like you said, he's affable, and that has a lot to do with it. But talent, of course, you might get the door open, but you better be able to walk through it.
Yep.
You better have the gear.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we walked through it.
Yeah, so
And
am I.
That's about enough of us for 1 week. Thank Joe West for being on again today. Thank John Shaffner for being our featured guest, and
Thank our audience for looking in.
And thank Derek for his
Keen insight
and participation, and not getting me picking my nose in any shots.
Oh boy!
All right.
Thanks very much for looking in, folks.
See you next week.
See you next week is right.
Next week's guest, co-star in the revival of NBC's iconic series, Night Court, Lakrita.
We'll see you next week.